This is London, a city of startups and centuries-old wealth. Its economy is worth over £600 billion, placing it ahead of Norway and Chile. If London were a country, it would be the 22nd largest economy in the world. But that prosperity is an illusion, at least for the rest of the UK. This one region, home to just a third of the population, generates nearly half of the country's entire economic output. Remove it from the equation, and Britain's average living standards drop by 14%, low enough to rival parts of Eastern Europe the UK once dismissed as developing. Beyond London, schools are crumbling, public services are overwhelmed, and more than 14 million people now live in poverty. That is 21% of the whole population, and it includes 4.3 million children, 8.1 million working-age adults, and 2.1 million pensioners. So how did the country that invented the modern economy end up here? This is the story of how the UK, a once richest nation on Earth, is starting to look like a developing country. The UK is going through a rough patch, and it has been that way for a while. Over the past 10 years, people's income after tax and benefits has barely changed, while the cost of living has gone way up. Today, people can afford less than they could a decade ago. At the same time, the country's productivity is lagging behind, and housing has become nearly impossible to afford. Shockingly, the UK now has more homeless people than any other developed nation. So, how did things get this bad? It didn't happen overnight. Years of political missteps and missed opportunities led here. Britain didn't crash, it drifted into crisis. Ironically, this was the first country to industrialize. Now, it's at risk of becoming the first to de-industrialize. The economy is shrinking in real terms, and prices keep climbing. The average home prices jumped over £2,000. Not long ago, the UK was a magnet for global talent, a place where professionals came to build their future. But now it's a nation under serious pressure, worse than many realize. It all started from a few major shocks: Brexit, COVID, and the war in Ukraine. But the real turning point goes back further to the 2008 financial crisis. After the crash, the government spent over £140 billion bailing out banks, then turned around and cut public spending. There were no big tax breaks, no push for better wages, no help with housing or inflation. Just budget cuts and austerity. For everyday people, that meant 15 years of flat incomes and fewer opportunities. Economists call it a lost decade. For many Brits, it just feels like being stuck with no clear way out. Back in 2007, the average UK household was doing pretty well, only slightly behind families in Norway and the US in terms of income. But fast forward to today, and the gap has widened a lot. Now, British households earn about 20% less than Norwegians and 16% less than Americans. This drop in income has hit the middle class the hardest, and it's a big deal because household income plays a major role in how an economy grows. When people have more money, they spend more, which boosts the economy and improves daily life. But in the UK, the government chose to focus more on helping big businesses than on supporting the wider economy. Even then, the benefits for companies were short-lived. One key area they neglected was productivity, the amount of value each worker creates. And that's a big problem. Here's the thing. Improving productivity doesn't mean working longer hours. It's about getting more done with the same effort. For example, if a country moves from farming to high-tech industries, workers create more value without working harder. That's why countries like Japan are replacing farms with factories, because it makes the economy more efficient. In the UK, though, productivity growth stalled after the 2008 financial crisis. Investment dried up and progress slowed. According to research from the London School of Economics, productivity used to grow nearly 2% a year before the crash. Afterward, it flatlined, reversing a long-standing trend. Now, Britain has one of the lowest productivity levels among the G7 nations, only ahead of one other country. Before 2008, it was near the top just after the United States. This shift is a major reason why living standards in the UK have slipped so far behind. The UK economy has been quietly struggling for years. Wages have barely grown and productivity has stayed low. Yet no major political party really addressed it. It was a silent crisis unfolding in millions of homes across the country. Instead of being tackled directly, the frustration showed up in the form of Brexit. But Brexit only made things worse. It scared off foreign investors, cutting investment by about 25% between 2016 and 2021, according to the Bank of England. Then came COVID. To protect the economy, the government borrowed around £280 billion at the time. Interest rates were near zero, so it seemed affordable. But that was before the Ukraine war hit. When Russia invaded Ukraine, energy prices across Europe soared. Sanctions cut off Russian oil and gas, and British households suddenly faced energy bills 3 times higher than before. The government stepped in again, offering up to £100 billion in support, one of the most generous packages in Europe. But all that spending drove national debt to new highs. Inflation skyrocketed. In response, the Bank of England hiked interest rates. For regular people, this meant their mortgage payments jumped overnight. And for the government, paying off debt became way more expensive as annual debt payments rose from £40 billion to £100 billion. That's a £60 billion surge, about the same as the entire UK defence budget. While Britain's financial support for Ukraine was seen by many as a moral stand and a necessary show of solidarity, it came at a steep price. The government poured billions into aid and subsidies during an already fragile economic period. Combined with the pandemic costs and energy crisis, this extra spending pushed the UK's finances to a breaking point. Now, the cost of paying interest on the national debt has exploded. It has become the second largest item in the entire government budget, only behind healthcare. In other words, the UK is spending more money just on debt interest than on schools, policing, or infrastructure. The rising national debt has drained tens of billions of pounds that could have been used elsewhere. Because of this, the government has less money to spend on important things like hospitals, schools, and transport. Most public services have taken a hit, and that's made it harder for them to do their jobs properly. But economics isn't just about money or stock markets, it's really about people, what they do, the choices they make, and how factors like age, health, or family affect those choices. After COVID lockdowns ended and things started to feel normal again, most rich countries saw a jump in the number of people returning to work. But not the UK. Take a look at this chart. It shows how G7 countries bounced back between 2019 and 2023. Britain stands out because its workforce never fully recovered. Having fewer people working has a domino effect. The government collects less tax, so there's less money to fund healthcare and other public services. At the same time, it has to spend more on things like welfare and benefits. On top of that, when people are not working, they are not spending money, so shops, businesses, and jobs all take a hit too. But the problem is bigger than it seems. While official numbers say unemployment is fairly low at 4.4%, the real issue is the 11 million people missing from the workforce altogether. These people are not counted as unemployed. They're classed as economically inactive. Here's what that means. Around 2.1 million young people aged 16 to 24 are in full-time education. About 3.5 million people over 50 have left work due to illness or early retirement. And over 1 million working-age adults aren't working because they're caring for others. That adds up to a massive gap in the workforce. But businesses still need staff. To fill that gap, the UK opened its doors to more immigration, especially from places like South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Migrants came in to help keep things running. While that helped the economy, it also stirred up tensions. Some people felt uneasy about the rapid demographic changes. Unfortunately, some politicians used that fear to push their own agendas. By August 2024, frustration boiled over. Anti-immigration protests and riots broke out across more than 20 towns in Britain. Even though the worst of the unrest has passed, the underlying problems are still there, and fixing them won't be quick or easy. Britain's economic story has become one of steady decline, where each issue seems to spark another, creating a ripple effect that's hard to escape. These aren't just random setbacks, they're the results of long-standing decisions, and now the consequences are unavoidable. Of course, no country is immune to hard times, and the UK is not an exception. London still stands as a global powerhouse, rich in talent, money, and creativity. That gives reason to believe better days will eventually come. But for the time being, the uncomfortable truth remains. Outside its capital, the country operates more like a struggling, unstable economy, trying to hold itself together.